One.
Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. Apologies, everybody. I say that a lot, Brian. The apologies, everybody, should be like a catchphrase, right? If I was a YouTuber, like that would be the thing I say. Because we've been out of it for the summer, and I'm just gonna say the following, like travel, summer, getting ready for school, all that jazz takes it out. But the NBA is almost back, Brian, and so are we. And unlike last year, we didn't have to wait for the drama we were waiting for. So last year, we said, hey, we'll wait till Ben Simmons simmers down and we'll talk about that. That'll be our big comeback. And Ben Simmons is like, I'm not getting traded till the trade deadline, so you guys go on without me. Which, I mean, I think that was his MO last season, right? Ben Simmons, it was like the Sixers had to wait on him, the Nets had to wait on him. We're still waiting on him. But this summer, the nice part is we were waiting on the Jazz, and the Jazz did what we wanted 100%. Basically, the Rudy Gobert trade, now the Donovan Mitchell trade. So I'd say basically, in terms of rookie of the year debate, Donovan Mitchell couldn't even touch Ben Simmons. But in terms of, thank goodness, get your trade out of the way so we can start podcasting again, we're Team Donovan Mitchell. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I know that legitimate shows want some big topic that they can talk about for a month straight and all the viewers love it, but I don't care about views at all. I just want to talk about each thing once. It is perfect for me. We don't need to drag this stuff out, Trey.
Yeah, I mean, okay, let's do our first tangent, but then we'll get on track. Like, I'm pretty sure you saw some of the stuff going on about Citizens United and CNN. And
Hmm.
we've actually had this theory thought before, and it's not even ours. So I first heard from Adam Todd Brown about CNN basically kind of being almost a Fox pipeline. And then some of the stuff that's been coming out basically is CNN kind of going for Fox like tactics. And it really is kind of what you're
Basically, they
saying. It's going on.
fired their head of CNN and they have a new guy, and he is a known Trump supporter. And he has said that he's going to change the newsroom to go farther right. So that's what all this comes from.
And the unfortunate reality is the 24-hour news cycle. We have to talk about something. We have to stir something up. If there is not a controversy, we have to make a controversy. That's taken over, it's annoyingly taken over part of the media cycle as well as taken over one of the political parties, which is that's very dangerous when you couple those two together. And so unfortunately CNN looks to be going in that vein as well. And so exactly what you were just saying about, like, you don't need to talk over and over, that same kind of thinking is in sports. Luckily it's more innocuous, right? In sports, we will hear pundits at ESPN over and over and over say, like, where is Giannis going, right? Who are the Lakers going to get next, et cetera, stuff like that. It's stupid. It's the same playbook, but luckily it doesn't matter, right? Luckily, people listening to Giannis is going to LA don't then go and vote in ways that are detrimental to the country. All right, we'll get off the political soapbox. Let's give the brief script for the Boxscore Geek show. We are going to talk Kevin Durant and the biggest no move in NBA history, maybe. Going to talk Donovan Mitchell and the Utah Jazz. And then we're going to talk a little chess, Brian, because, we always love tacking on a little chess. I don't think I did introductions properly. I am your host, Dre Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. You can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. Hope the end of your summer went okay, Brian, and let's get into Kevin Durant. I don't have a ton to say, except it was definitely funny that he didn't move. And the reality, unfortunately, is that's likely for the best. A thesis I've had, I still want to write about it. It was an idea I had a couple years back to maybe go on in earnest at nerdnumbers.substack.com, was looking at every star trade in NBA history. And a thesis I have, which does seem to be true, the research seems to back it, is there has never been a successful star trade in NBA history. By that, what I mean is if you have a star player who is both a real star and a production star, right? And Donovan Mitchell is going to be very fascinating when we talk that kind of thing. But if you talk about a LeBron James, a Charles Barkley, a Kevin Durant, there's never been a case where a team trades a player of that caliber that is still healthy and they get equal back. Even in the cases where we like the packages they get back, as an example, Chris Paul was traded for Montrezl Harrell and a couple of picks. What tends to happen, oddly, is if the teams get back undervalued assets, they never readjust their valuation of the asset, and the asset goes out the door. And so when I first had this thesis, the Chris Paul for Montrezl Harrell trade had gone through. Chris Paul was like, oh, maybe he's on the downslope because he missed some time the next season. I said Montrezl Harrell's maybe on the upslope, so maybe this will actually be a case where the Clippers in trading Chris Paul will make up for it. And nope, we do have one of the most fascinating trades in the Philadelphia 76ers Brooklyn Nets with James Harden and Ben Simmons. But what is currently happening is both have been injured and below their standard. So I don't know what's going to end up there. But in looking at, say, Kevin Durant is fascinating in that he is old and beat up. So, right, he's missed a lot of time. That if Kevin Durant had been healthy the last 2 seasons, let's say I think he's been 60% healthy, right? If you look at minutes, if Kevin Durant is 75% healthy, the narrative around the Brooklyn Nets is 100% different. The narrative around, oh, ho, ho, look at the, the Golden State Warriors and how they won that trade is 100% different. As is, he hasn't been healthy, but at his peak, he is still worth it. So I don't think the Nets were ever going to get anything back in return. So the story for those that have forgotten, I mean, I think when we talk the news media cycle, he is now out of it. There's other stuff that's now in it, right? Including the Donovan Mitchell trade. But Kevin Durant basically in the offseason is like, I want off this team or I want you to fire the coach. And possibly trade Kyrie. I'm not sure if that was on the table or if he likes Kyrie. It's a very interesting thing. And basically the Nets are like, no. And for those that don't know, Kevin Durant signed at least another couple of years with the Brooklyn Nets. And so he kind of put his demands out and the Nets said no. And he's like, I'm happy to be back. And for what it's worth, we approve of that. I approve of both sides if this makes any sense. For Kevin Durant, he has no leverage outside of demanding a trade. So if Kevin Durant wants a trade, he has to demand it. For the Brooklyn Nets, the right maneuver is to say no. And I will give some examples that people may forget. The Jordan rules came out in 1990, right before the 1991 season when Michael Jordan took off. Michael Jordan did not think that the Chicago Bulls had put enough around him and was basically demanding to be traded or this is wild to think about, thinking that Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant weren't enough support. And then, of course, for those that don't know, Horace Grant, Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan turned into the greatest,
Trio.
Big three. Oh, my goodness. Can't believe I missed that. Dave Barry years ago looked at this. When we talk big threes, Horace Grant, Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan is the strongest big three ever, meaning those three put up the most wins and were the most percentage of their team wins of all time. I'm going to give a preemptive shout out to Scott Williams because he's got a book coming out in November. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Ben Guest helped write it. So friend of the show, Ben Guest helped write it. And one of the things that I've talked with Ben about before that's really sad is in 1994, Phil Jackson basically planned the second iteration of the Bulls. The really, really tall backcourt, like everybody's super tall. And he planned that around Scott Williams at center. And then what happened is Michael Jordan retired before the season started. Scott Williams got injured, and then the Bulls let Scott Williams walk. And so Scott Williams went from potentially being the anchor of what we saw. When Dennis, now nothing personal to Scott Williams, Dennis Rodman is clearly superior to Scott Williams. I don't even think Scott Williams would feel upset hearing that. But Scott Williams was almost the Dennis Rodman part. If you look at his age curve, he was getting really, really good. In the 1993 NBA Finals, he played really well. And it looked like going into the 1994 season, he was set to break out age curve wise. He was going to be kind of do the same thing Scottie Pippen and Horace Grant did and be the anchor of possibly the first and only team in the three-point era to four-peat. Still hasn't happened, Brian. What are your Warriors doing, right? They're not light years till they four-peat, in my opinion.
They got a new one going.
3 more years, right? But anyway, with all that said, right? So Scott Williams could have been that, and it didn't happen. But yeah, that's the biggest three-headed monster of all time. Michael Jordan was like demanding a trade or thinking his people weren't good enough, and they said no. Kobe Bryant at one point was demanding off the Lakers, and they said no. So in NBA history, when a star and a front office clash, when the front office stands firm and says no, it tends to work out. And don't forget, Ben Simmons is potentially coming back. So that is the real question is how healthy is Ben Simmons? Because if Ben Simmons is healthy and Kevin Durant can do what he's done the last 2 seasons, which is still unfortunate, This is one thing I've mentioned a few times and just want to reiterate, and you as a Warriors fan know well, and are at least on the right side of this. Other Warriors fans are wrong. You, Brian, you are an awesome Warriors fan. You and Jeremy Britton are always straddling for first and second and best Warriors fan. I'm going to give it to you this week because you're on the show.
Fantastic.
But Kevin Durant, the last 2 seasons, has looked star level, but not near his peak, and has not been able to stay healthy. But if he can even put up what he did last season, which was 2,000 minutes played, 215 wins per 48, so twice as good as an average player as a power forward. And he put up almost 10 wins last season. If he can do that again, and Ben Simmons can come back healthy, this team's in great shape, and the Nets were 100% right. The only weird thing, which is becoming more and more clear, is like Kyrie Irving is just fascinating because he is incredibly talented. He's a skilled player. We've liked him. Off the court issues, he's had lots of weird stuff. And then, of course, now he's hitting the injury thing. So, in regards to the Nets, the Kevin Durant scenarios, I'm like, it's the right maneuver, but it's still going to be a real volatile mess next season with the cast they've got.
Player empowerment is dead, Dre. Died with Kevin. No, not really. I think it's funny how people always bring that up, though. I mean, yeah, the teams do have leverage, right? It doesn't always work out. Kawhi Leonard famously, forced his way off the Spurs. But
Although, what I would say is really fascinating about that is the Spurs did something that we heard about Donovan Mitchell maybe as I want to call it a bullshit rumor. I think it was Schefter or someone said that they heard a
Schefter, that's
rumor.
funny. He's an NFL guy.
Not Schefter, someone else. I'm
No,
sorry, I
but
apologize.
sometimes, the breaking news guys do that. They break stuff in other sports. Anyway.
But there was a rumor that the Jazz were upset with Donovan Mitchell, and that's why they traded him to Cleveland instead of New York, which I don't believe it. But if that's true, that's on them. There was not just a rumor, but at the time of Kawhi's trading, they were really going out of their way to say, screw you to the Lakers, right? The Lakers thought they were going to get LeBron, Kawhi, and Paul George. And, oh
That's
boy,
right.
that could have been something. And the Spurs were like, we are not trading you to the Lakers. And the Spurs, when Anthony Davis was getting traded, were calling the Pelicans and saying, don't you dare. Don't you dare. I like that, like Dre plus dare. So dare, new word, right? But don't you dare trade Anthony Davis to the Lakers. So I think in the Kawhi scenario, they could have either held out, and it was impressive because Kawhi sat out a full season. There was belief. I've said this conspiracy theory before about last year with Ben Simmons. It looked at the beginning of the season that he was done in Philadelphia and wanted to be traded, and I think that's 100%. And I also think that there was a wink, wink, nudge, nudge deal with Daryl Morey ahead of the season. I can't prove any of this, but it seems like that was the fact. I then think, here's my conspiracy theory. I think Ben Simmons was more injured than thought. And when he was getting his physicals, et cetera, it was revealed. And essentially, the situation was the Nets and the 76ers had agreed ahead of time to do the trade for Harden for Simmons. And then Ben Simmons was more beat up, and they kind of were stuck in that they had already agreed. And then, both parties couldn't admit as much and kind of had to wait. And then, of course, Ben Simmons camp, the 76ers, the Nets, none of them wanted to get out that Ben Simmons is more beat up because, everybody's like, oh, he's just holding out, a la Kawhi Leonard, to get traded. And then after he got traded, it's like, oh, he's going to be back for the playoffs, right? And he wasn't. So I think his injury was far worse than known, and just could be Grant Hillish. That's the thing. When I talk about the Nets next season, this could be a Grant Hill scenario where I applauded and still applaud the Ben Simmons trade. The logic being, the simple reality is James Harden versus Ben Simmons. For those who don't remember, basically James Harden and Ben Simmons were traded for each other from the 76ers, Ben Simmons from the 76ers to the Nets, James Harden from the Nets to the 76ers. Looks good. But it could be very Grant Hillish in that if Ben Simmons injured himself more than people realized in the conference finals the last time he played for the 76ers, he might never be 100% again. And I think his injuries were not as known. And then the 76ers and the Nets kind of had, and Ben Simmons camp, all three parties were incentivized to keep that hush-hush. So that's what I think happened last season. Because him not coming back from the playoffs is really weird. We're just going to have to see what happens.
I mean, with the way it went down, that's a logical explanation, right? Because nothing happened for a long time, then all of a sudden it just happened. It was kind of weird.
It
So,
reminded me a
yeah.
lot, interestingly enough, of the Kyrie Irving for Isaiah Thomas trade. So similar scenario. So we're talking Kawhi, Ben Simmons, Kyrie. All three of those players, what they kind of had in common is they had an injury, right? And it's kind of interesting to put it in quotes because I do think that at least one of them was legit. Actually, I think both Kawhi and Ben Simmons, in fact, I think all three were legit. That's the funny reality. Had an injury and basically stuck with the injury and said, I'm not going to play unless you trade me. I'm going to stay out injured unless you trade me. And in the Isaiah Thomas case, after the trade was completed, the Cleveland Cavaliers came back to the Celtics and said, Isaiah Thomas is more injured than you told us. And we're going to cancel the trade. We're going to get a physical. We're going to do, back in the day, this happened with the Oklahoma City Thunder. They traded for Tyson Chandler, and what could have been?
And his career was pretty much done after that, Dre. He's tried to make comebacks, but he's
Yeah,
never been the same player since that
he's
injury.
done. He played through injury in the playoffs, played through his sister's death in the playoffs, and it was the conference finals, and he was not 100%. And because of that, the Cleveland Cavaliers were able to win. An annoying thing we've talked before at length on the show about players like James Harden and Ben Simmons, which is if you try and play through injury in the playoffs, sometimes you hurt your team. Sometimes you think you're coming back to help your team. And what really happens is you're not up to snuff. So you are worse than your replacement would be. And you actually hurt your team. And arguably that happened with Isaiah Thomas. And then worst case, and the worse, he got injured even further. This came up, we talked about this a little, where Rob Williams III came out and said, hey, the doctors say I'm fine and I can't get any more injured. And Isaiah Thomas snapped back on Twitter, hey, I've heard that before. So you're right. Isaiah Thomas was done. And so that could potentially have happened. But in all three of these cases, it was a player sitting out with injury demanding a trade and then finding out after the fact, and then after the fact in the case of Isaiah, he was worse. Now, Kawhi and Kyrie turned out fine. We'll see what happens with Ben Simmons.
Yeah, I mean, in sports, there's always the cliche of leadership and whatnot, and I think it matters kind of less than people talk about on the court, but it's really important off the court. Like, there's basically, these three different stars in Brooklyn all just kind of battling each other in ownership, and none of them have been able to, put every. Well, maybe they have. We'll see, right? Maybe they have. Maybe I'm being too pessimistic. Because here's the thing, I think most people are just completely writing the Nets off. And while we shouldn't expect all three players to get back to where they were, it's certainly possible it could happen, or maybe two out of the three. So I think writing off the Nets early is a mistake, but it does seem like a mess at the start.
Yeah, I like the Nets. I like the upside of the Nets, I'll say that.
Their role players are really good too.
Did they? I think they may have lost one. This is one where we're going to have to analyze, but I did just want to talk the Kevin Durant scenario. And I mean, I did want to reiterate for the billionth time on player empowerment and such. I've said a few of these things before, but I'll say them again. So for Warriors fans, again, not you and Jeremy are awesome, and recognize rightfully that Kevin Durant is the fucking reason you guys are a dynasty. It is entirely possible. It is entirely possible that if your squad re-signs Harrison Barnes and Steph Curry tweaks his ankle and maybe rushes back early, because for those that don't recall, during the Kevin Durant years of the Warriors, Steph Curry did have injuries, but he would just sit, and the Warriors behind Kevin Durant, shocker, played very well, and then Steph Curry would come back healthy, and they'd both play well, and then the team was mostly close to full strength in the playoffs, right? They went 16-1 the first year with them. It's there you go. That's all you need, right? Whereas if Kevin Durant's not there and the Warriors are, a middling 40 team, Steph Curry might rush back, injure his ankle even more, and might be done. So there is no light years Warriors without Kevin Durant. And Kevin Durant rushed back to try and get himself into the finals to try and win. And by the way, that finals was much closer than having the right being. With Kevin Durant and Klay Thompson out injured, and with how well the Toronto Raptors were playing, I thought that finals was going to be very reminiscent of the last Cleveland Cavaliers finals, like a 4-1. The fact that it went 6 games and was close is truly remarkable, and is not shocking that Draymond, Steph Curry could come back and win another one. So I really hate this idea that Steph Curry was so much better than Kevin Durant when Kevin Durant's got the 2 Finals MVPs. It's very Shaq versus Kobe, where Kobe fans will like just completely forget Shaq, and it's like Shaq had the 3 Finals MVPs. Shaq got the Triple Crown, MVP, All-Star MVP, Finals MVP in 2001 or 2000. Should have had it in 2001 too, but you got to give it to Allen Iverson for scoring lots of points.
Here's what I'll say
I
about Warriors fans. I mean, yes, you're right. They love to troll on social media, and of course they're going to attack KD. And KD himself has been going at it in the last few weeks. It's been pretty funny. But of course they're going to stand Steph Curry. But I promise you this. If he were to somehow get traded back to the Warriors, it looks like it's impossible now. 110% of the fans would be all for it. They love KD.
Of course.
They love KD.
Well, I mean, it is truly rough to deal with the fact that we have some of the best. These players are the best athletes ever, right? Kevin Durant is, top 20 all time easily.
Dre, he's pissed off today that he has a 96 rating in NBA 2K instead of 99. That's how motivated he is.
It gets interesting because a trick you used to be able to do in 2K, at least I would always do, is you could turn off injuries. So
wow.
if Kevin Durant isn't injured, 100% he's a 99. I think it's fine to call him a 96 if you factor in the fact that he had actually not 90. Sorry, Katie, 96 is fair. You were a 99, 100% agreed. You just haven't been because you got injured. But I mean, it's rough that he's a top 20 all time, probably top 10. I don't know where he'll end his career because of injury and stuff. And it's just really rough that you can be that good and still, he still obviously gets upset with stuff, still gets to fight on Twitter. He's still human. So that's just very amusing to watch. And I'll throw this out. I'm catching up on The Sopranos. I've never seen it, so I'm on season 4. It's a really good show.
It is. It's got to feel a little dated, right? But it's really well made.
Well, one of the comments I made about its datedness that was really funny is a huge part of their criminal organization and enterprise is sports betting.
Yes.
And I almost want to just be like, brought to you by DraftKings. Like they're sitting here talking about like the Super Bowl and like the feds are watching everybody for Super Bowl action and stuff because they know that they're doing bets. And one of the made guys, that's one of the first things he does. He gets a sports book and messes it up. So it's just like very amusing to watch that. But I mean, it's funny. I'll say this about The Sopranos, how progressive it is in some cases, and then dated. Of course, homophobic jokes are. You watch anything from the 2000s, and it does not age well. But it has homophobic jokes, and a lot of comedy has homophobic jokes. So there you go. But anyway, like on The Sopranos, what I always enjoy that the show does really well is you've got these mobsters that are dealing with, like I just mentioned, sports books, $1 million deals, these really intricate conspiracy crimes, right? And what the show does well is like they're children or they're high schoolers, right? They'll get mad at each other over trivial things. And the season I'm on, I know I read up on it. Tony Soprano gets beef with another gangster because he really likes a horse and the other gangster tries to kill the horse for insurance money. So the same thing happens in sports, which I think people forget. And I mean, we're going to talk Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell in a second. Just that, right? Like you will have a great team and a great team falls apart. And when you get back to it, it will be most famous of all time would be like Shaq and Penny in Orlando. And it's like they were mad at like Shaq and Penny were mad at each other about like commercials they were getting and who was getting more attention. And, same thing, Shaq and Kobe, right, broke up. They probably had 1 or 2 more title runs in them if, they'd stuck together. And you look after the fact and you talk to both of them like, oh, yeah, I probably overreacted. I probably, freaked out. And Kevin Durant is the king of this, where I think Kevin Durant, I get upset calling it like thin-skinned. I really hate that type of language. But Kevin Durant has very clearly had some interesting responses and emotions to things. And I can't really even fault him. Like I said, I can't fault him for going to New Jersey. The only thing, or Brooklyn, the only thing I fault him for, as I've mentioned before, is he shouldn't have come back in the finals, which is hard. Like it's really hard to tell top tier athletes, you are your brand. And when you are done, you are done. And sometimes you got to think to the future versus thinking, hey, I've really got it. This is my last chance to win a title. And I'll give a shout out. I've said this a couple times before. Draymond Green or Klay Thompson, I'm forgetting one of the Warriors, Draymond Green or Klay Thompson came out and noted just how little you get paid for the playoffs versus how much, if you're a contender, how much you play. So
right, I remember that.
That's all I got for KD. Oh, and then the last thing, I will throw this out, and I did put this in an article on Talk This, is one thing that bugs me too is anybody that tries to do the KD versus Andrew Wiggins misses a very important part, which is if KD doesn't agree to a sign and trade with the Brooklyn Nets, then the Warriors don't have Andrew Wiggins. Like,
Right.
you can't really, in honesty, try and say Andrew Wiggins matters more than KD, suck it, KD, without acknowledging that you don't have Andrew Wiggins without Kevin Durant agreeing to that trade. And then the follow-up I'll also give is like, Andrew Wiggins played fine, but a light years front office should be able to find a player of that caliber at small forward anywhere. Like, if you have $30 million and you can't, then this is going to be your thesis. I'll let this lead us into Donovan Mitchell, because the thesis I'll give you is if you have $30 million to spend on a small forward, it should be trivial to get a player that played at the production level of Andrew Wiggins last season.
Yeah. No, that's right. And well, we talked about this a lot when it was going on. They did this kind of Doctor Strange level of like layers of inception, like to make this all happen. And they did win a title though, which is funny. So I guess they proved me wrong, but I'm not sure if all those moves are what actually caused the title.
I'll throw these three out. And I wrote an article about it, and I was really happy that it paid off, because I wrote an article praising Gary Payton and criticizing Andrew Wiggins. And luckily I did it right before Andrew Wiggins had as many points as shots in the last game of the NBA Finals. Well, Steph Curry went off for 50 points or something like that.
I'll give the Warriors credit in one area, though. They have come out and said, we're not going to pay Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins. So they are already setting up to like break up the team a little bit, and that's good. They should do that.
They're going to trade Jordan Poole and keep Andrew Wiggins. I'm sorry to tell you. Anyway,
we'll see.
But the player was Gary Payton, and I've mentioned this before. If you look at the Warriors, the players that are really, really responsible for their success are Steph Curry and Draymond Green, who were on the team before the current ownership got them. Andre Iguodala and Kevin Durant, the first three Finals MVP of the squad. And both of those players forced themselves off contenders and took less money to be on the Warriors.
And interestingly, Iguodala recruited Durant, so that was like a 2-for-1.
There you go. And Gary Payton was arguably the MVP of the Warriors last season. I know it hurts to say. I won't dispute that, say, Draymond Green and Steph Curry were better, like at their peaks. But in terms of consistency and total body of work in the regular season, you could make the argument Gary Payton was the best. And one thing I love about him, very similar to Andrew Wiggins, is many people say he's a really good defender. So if you're like, if we say Andrew Wiggins is average and people tout back, oh, well, you're undervaluing his defense. And then I say Gary Payton is the best player on the team. Well, if the box score metrics undervalue defense, then Gary Payton is even better than he looks, is what I'll give there. And Gary Payton was cut by the Warriors, came back and was going to try and be a video scout, and had enough moxie. I forget the player who was competing against, who was not good.
It was Avery Bradley.
Oh my goodness! Like,
they made the right choice there.
Avery Bradley and Gary Payton. I don't know what you're doing, but he forced his way on the team and was huge. So it's kind of funny that the Warriors, and when you're talking like, I guess the moves they made won. It's like, no, the moves that have won for the Warriors in their time have been Kevin Durant, Andre Iguodala, Gary Payton, and these three players forced their way on the squad. So we'll see where they're at next season. I think I did bet the under on them, if I recall. I can't remember, but with Gary Payton walking out the door, and that was interesting. I'll give I think Danny LaRue over at Real GM, I want to say, I think he wrote an article for The Athletic way back that noted, I didn't realize it. We talked about this on the show. So you were right, Brian. So as always, Brian, Warriors fan. Most of the time, Brian, when you say stuff and I disagree, you're right. And I should just learn my lesson, but I don't. Because you said you thought they had Gary Payton's bird rights, and you're right. Basically,
it was the early bird.
It's early bird. Yeah. So because he was young enough, and it's kind of funny where what I had thought for bird rights is 3 continuous years, and he had been cut. But essentially, early bird rights, it's like a weird thing where it's like, as long as you've played enough time with a team, it rolls back. So because he had played 2 seasons back to back with them, they have his early bird rights, and they could have matched Portland. And so that's like the simple logic is you re-sign Gary Payton and you offload Andrew Wiggins when his value is high. Yeah. That would have been the easy move. They didn't do that, but there you are.
Yeah, they just want to move out their veterans to make room for the young players. And to me, I want more titles, but That's what their priorities are. They want Kuminga and Moody to get more minutes.
Well, the simple but one thing that you've been good at, and I've been praising you on Twitter about, is that you always look for motivation. That's a really good thing to do, because it is often the case that players, and I might talk to Donovan Mitchell in a second, players, front office, their motivation isn't what you think. Like, it is very funny to think that for most people in the NBA, this is players, this is coaches, this is general managers, this is even owners. Their motivation isn't to win, which is wild, because the data is pretty clear cut. The data says if you win, you make money. If you win, you attract stars. If you win, you get notoriety over time. If you win, the value of your franchise goes up, right? Like the Warriors are the top 3 most valuable franchise, and It's all about those titles. Winning is really good, but for people, you'll point out, general managers, their goal is to keep their job. Coaches, their goal is to keep their job. Players, their goal is to get paid. And in many of those cases, winning isn't doing that. And owners, a lot of time, it's like the stigma, right? They want to be perceived a certain way. And so if the Warriors say, hey, our light years moves, our galaxy brain, Doctor Strange move to pick up Andrew Wiggins isn't why we're winning. It's this video scout player that came out of nowhere. And by out of nowhere means looks fine. Then they have to confess it wasn't me. Yeah. And so if you're an owner that gets in front of a mic and says, I'm light years ahead and I'm a genius and I'm such a smart person, your goal might not be to highlight the decisions you didn't make that are responsible for your success. So that's
I think it's more subconscious, though, because they could have just kept Gary Payton and then just kept not praising him, right? But they chose not to, so I think they really made the choice. We don't think he's a very good player.
But part of the reason that happened is because Portland did actually offer him a lot of money, and then if they have to keep him, if they keep for $9 million, people have to go like, wait, why are you giving him $9 million when he wasn't?
Yeah.
So, all right, let's talk about overrated players, galaxy brain moves. Donovan Mitchell and lose. Now this is our argument, and I think you're right, Brian. I'll say that after all that stuff, saying, hey, you were right in the past. I think you're still right. But I'll crystallize, I think, what your argument is. Apologies. So Donovan Mitchell was traded, correct me if I'm wrong, it's like four picks of some variety, like 2 first round, 2 second round, or whatever.
I think it's 3 first round picks and 3 pick swaps. I don't know if I care about pick swaps, but
and I'll get to that. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I don't care about any of them, Brian. That's my 2 cents. I've said this, and I've got to have some unpopular opinions, right, Brian? Because it's like certain unpopular opinions people start agreeing with. And so, like, Donovan Mitchell was definitely one that was unpopular, and I think people kind of come around on. So the unpopular opinion I'm going to give here is draft picks don't matter. And someone, when we were doing our draft show, got upset when I was saying that draft picks don't matter. And I'm going to hold by that, because the reason I argue draft picks don't matter, I'm stealing a point Chris Ye has made about this, a frequent guest co-host. I think he's an honorary co-host of the show, Chris Ye. And I think I might be wrong, but I think there might be a blitzscaling podcast starting. I hope that's him. Either there is a blitzscaling podcast starting soon, or someone made a fake account pretending to be Chris Ye and saying there's a blitzscaling podcast starting soon.
He's doing one about blitzscaling maybe a year or 2 ago, so maybe he's picking it up again.
Well, he had, okay, so Chris Ye has the Chris Ye podcast. So that's Chris, last name is Ye, Y-E-H, chrisye.com. You can find all the stuff there, so go there for sure. He has the Chris Ye podcast, and he does blitzscaling ventures with Scott, and I don't want to get the last name wrong, but with Scott, who both work there. And that, as he mentioned, that's currently for free. Like, he gives his analysis of trading stuff. So he does that, as well as doing podcasts and other variety of things. Friends of his from Stanford and Harvard, fellow game show alums, just various topics, fun podcasts. But I think there is one specifically coming about blitzscaling, or someone's making a fake one about blitzscaling. We'll find out. But really just the point that he has made, Sorry, I've completely lost my thought. So Chris made that. Can you get me back, actually? If I was editing, I would definitely edit this out.
You derailed me, too. No, something about Donovan Mitchell.
Well, anyway, about wow, I'm going to feel really bad about that. Apologies that I dropped it, but I gave Chris Ye a big plug, and I'm a big fan of his. But so anyway, with Donovan Mitchell and kind of the draft picks, there we go. The draft picks involved in the Donovan Mitchell trade do not matter. And the essential point is, if you are in a market like the NBA where you have assets that cannot be replaced versus assets that can be replaced, meaning I can go out on the market. If I'm a front office with $10 million, I can probably go out on the open market and find a way to get a draft pick. And lo and behold, I'll throw this out. Donovan Mitchell, I believe, was drafted 19th. Donovan Mitchell was a out of the lottery draft pick. The two of the MVPs, right? Giannis Antetokounmpo and Nikola Jokic were both picked out of the draft lottery. Nikola Jokic picked in the second round. If you want to acquire draft picks in the NBA, you can find players like Gary Payton and trade them for draft picks. You can offer money up. In the Nuggets history, my team, the Nuggets, they paid money outright for the draft pick that turned into Ty Lawson, who was a fantastic guard for them. Draft picks do not matter because they are 100% replaceable. Versus, it doesn't matter. You can be the New York, I almost said Nets, but New York Knicks. I mean, the New York Knicks have $100 million and want a top 3, top 5, top 10 player. And as we've seen over and over and over again, just doesn't happen, right? It doesn't matter how much money the Knicks offer for LeBron James or not Carmelo Anthony or Dwayne Wade, et cetera. The players just don't want to play for them. And so that's why I argue, if you ever look at a trade, I'm still going to stand, not Stan Van Gundy, he's awesome too. Jeff Van Gundyism, where he says the team that gets the best player wins the trade. Basically, the logic is, I've used big O notation. I was telling Chris about this. So in computer science, when you're looking at computation, how long it would take to figure something out, really you look at what takes the longest and everything else doesn't matter. So it's like, if you have a piece of hardware that's going to take an hour, it doesn't matter if all this other side stuff takes 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If you have to wait on that hour is the big thing. And, I didn't explain that quite perfectly. And if you want a big, long lecture on big O notation, I can give it to you someday.
Oh, sure. Yeah, he was a triple-double machine, Dre. Oscar Robertson. I get it.
You make that joke every time, and it never gets old, by the way, Brian. I'm not kidding. Like the big O, Oscar Robertson, love it.
I can't help
it. Yeah, it's good, and don't stop doing it. But all I was going to say is, really, in a trade, the best player matters. And I argue picks, if we're talking big O notation, for those that know, they're constants. You just cut them off. They do not matter. And in the cases people kind of start thinking that they do matter, it turns into luck. So, for instance, the pick that got the Cleveland Cavaliers, Kyrie Irving, happened in a pick swap for Baron Davis. The Clippers basically wanted to shed Baron Davis's contract and offered out a first-round pick, and they had like a 2% chance of getting the number 1, and they got it. And then it went to Cleveland. And so it's like, the pick wasn't the value there. It was the luck. And then, of course, we can argue conspiracy theories that the NBA, was the NBA placating, am I dropping his name? Dan Gilbert. Were they just placating Dan Gilbert over LeBron James? If we have like David Stern, Patrick Ewing conspiracy theories, that might have been what happened. Draft picks don't matter. I drop them from the trade immediately because they are replaceable. They are replaceable with money, which every team has an immense amount of. Every team is owned by a billionaire. So every team, if they're really serious about wanting draft picks, can easily replace some level of draft picks. And the draft lottery and the NBA draft is still so inefficient that you can find players like Donovan Mitchell even late in the draft where it's never a problem to replace. Additionally, with draft picks, because of the age curve, it takes players, including players like Donovan Mitchell, a couple of years to develop. Like, you have to wait at least a season. So if I trade you right now, if I trade you for a draft pick right now, even a top 5 one, I have to wait a year to use it. I probably have to wait a year or two before that player even develops into a productive NBA player. And I have no guarantee that they're going to turn into a productive NBA player. Versus if I get a productive NBA player now, I got him on a 2-3 year deal, I get 2 to 3 years of them. And the metaphor I've used before in the past is this is maybe a sacrilegious one. Ray Allen as a trade for the Boston Celtics was better than Kevin Durant as a draft pick for the Oklahoma City Thunder / Seattle Supersonics. And the Boston Celtics wanted Kevin Durant. The Boston Celtics thought they had a really good chance because they tanked intentionally to get Kevin Durant because they were hoping for a top 2 pick, and Kevin Durant was slated to go number 2. They didn't get him. They scrambled and traded for Ray Allen, and Ray Allen put up like 50 wins in his first 4 seasons. Kevin Durant put up 50 wins in his first 4 seasons, or in the next 4 seasons. But Kevin Durant had like 2 bad seasons, like had a bad season and an average season, whereas Ray Allen was just good throughout. So it's like, I argue draft picks are not a very good asset if you want to win now, and you can always replenish them. Like, you can always replenish draft picks near the draft. So these teams that trade like a player like Donovan Mitchell at the start of the season for a draft pick next year, I always argue, if the focus of the trade is those draft picks, you're wrong. Now, I don't hate the old school hinky model of just stockpile draft picks. Absolutely, why not? If you get rid of bad players to get draft picks, absolutely. If you trade a good player for a replacement player or able to replace a player, so for instance, the Houston Rockets lost Chandler Parsons back in the day, and they picked up Trevor Ariza. So it's like, okay, let's say I trade Chandler Parsons for draft picks because I'm signing Trevor Ariza. Absolutely no complaint. But if you trade a productive player, and this pains me, Brian, Donovan Mitchell's a productive player. You trade a productive player for draft picks. If they are the center point of the trade, it is worthless, which is always funny because you hear people like, oh my goodness, Utah got a haul. Look at all those draft picks. And I'm just funny in that I'm like, no, none of those matter. And we'll get to the players in a second.
Yeah, well, I do have argued against you on draft picks before. Well, let's cut down. Let's get a little more definitive here. What? So to say they're totally worthless is one thing, but then to say they're overvalued is another. Because here's the thing: there's a market value for them, right? So even no matter what your personal value is for a pick, there's still a market value. And I disagree with the analogy what you said earlier. You can turn around and trade that pick away to a different team immediately if you want to. You don't have to necessarily draft a player and wait. So I think your overall point is right. They are overvalued, but if I were a Utah fan, I would have wanted better players in return for my draft picks.
Okay, actually, I think that's a fantastic point. I think what's amusing, so we can point at me, it's getting very Moneyballish. So in the book Moneyball, something that Billy Bean would do frequently would be to notice habits of players and basically say, players have bad habits and it's really hard to break them of bad habits. So you have to be really, really careful if you sign a player for potential, if they have a bad habit, like if they can't stop stealing bases or they always swing at bad pitches, even if they have power, right? Even if you have some metric that's like, oh my goodness, this person can hit 500-foot home runs on the regular, you might have to pass. And one of the flaws that we notice in front offices frequently is the sunk cost fallacy. Patrick, when he started the Boxscore Geeks, this was one of his, and it was the NBA Geek at the time, but this was one of his first articles, was on the sunk cost fallacy. And what happens a lot of times is exactly what you're saying. You trade for a draft pick. Now, what you're saying is view that draft pick as an asset, turn around and flip it, you're in great shape. Teams often go, I can't flip that draft pick. That's a lottery pick. That's going to be a great player. And then they pick up a lottery player and they go, I can't trade this lottery player. They're the future. And then they invest a lot of time and effort. And after they've invested 4 years in this player, they go, I can't trade this player. I've invested 4 years in him and they're about to become a star. And I mean, I've kind of noticed that as the ironic flip side of what you were saying, which is to say teams that invest in draft picks, a risk they run into is getting too connected to them because the value of a lottery pick is really that you get a shot at a potential star, which is great, but it's not a great shot. That's just the odds, right? Because I mean, this isn't hard math. There are at any given point 10 to 20 players in the NBA that really dictate who can be a contender, and that's been the case for the history of the modern NBA, of the three-point era NBA. As soon as the ABA and NBA merged, you need a top 20 player to have any chance of competing, probably two. And if you don't, you can't compete. And for a lot of teams, a way to try and get them is via the draft because teams that have a top 20 player do not want to trade them. That being said, a couple do think players like Ben Wallace, think players like Rudy Gobert. It's doable, but it's still very hard. And actually, it's just simple odds. It's if there are 30 teams and there are 20 players, there aren't enough players to go around. So it's not even a matter of you can't get that player because you want them or other teams aren't going to make dumb decisions. It's just like Rudy Gobert can only be involved in one stupid trade a season, right? Like you can't give Rudy Gobert to 2 or 3 teams. So the draft isn't horrible. So you get a small chance at a star, but then what you also get is this lifeline because a draft pick is on a 2-year deal, then with the next 2 years at very favorable contract chances to you. And so the real edge you get with a player, say like Nikola Jokic, is you get 2 years to see if he pans out. If it looks like he's borderline, you get 2 one-year deals to re-sign him and see if he pans out. And if he doesn't, you're able to let him loose or trade him. And most teams, by the time, if they've drafted a player, they're going to give them thousands of minutes. And as soon as you've given players thousands of minutes, you go, I've invested all this time, I can't get rid of them. And then when it comes time to re-sign them, you go, I can't turn this number 5 pick into 2 second rounders, I'm losing money. I gotta just, I gotta up them to a big contract and hope they pan out.
R.J.
So I
Barrett
think
in
you're,
New York, that just happened.
oh yes, great one. So yeah, I mean I think that's what I kind of try and point out. I'm stealing from Andrew Sutton, who back in the day said, no bad contracts or no bad players on the squad. As a team, you really, really want to avoid holding any bad stock that you are going to overvalue and then have a risk. And sometimes that can just be the case, right? Like if you trade for a player like Andrew Wiggins, that's a risk because he's $30 million. And even if you say this player is overvalued, I don't think they're that good. If you're paying them $30 million, you're going to run the risk that you have to play them, especially because if you want to trade them, you can't not play them. So that's my 2 cents. And so draft picks, I'm just kind of like, it's cubic zirconium. It's not as valuable as you think, and teams don't use it correctly. So I think I could be swayed into saying almost three, modern day three ball
I mean,
era,
3
right?
draft picks just got you Rudy Gobert. Like, that sounds pretty good to me.
So I think again the I disagree, but you're right. I should just call it that, Brent.
I
Where
see
it's
what
like
you're saying. In practice, it's
the
true.
way most teams use draft picks, it is not good. And so I'm also still of the opinion if you have a choice between a productive player now versus any draft pick, you take the productive player now. That's my 2 cents. But I think you're right. I think teams are doing it. There is a huge inefficiency in how teams use draft picks, and teams could fix that. But that being said, I'm not confident that the Utah Jazz are going to use those drafts. I don't think they're going to turn around and flip them into good players. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Let's talk about the players, though, Brian. I'm so excited. Um, I'm excited for one reason because I'm immature and everybody's bring this. The Utah Jazz currently have Rudy Gay, and they're going to pick up Colin Sexton. And they're a heavily Mormon population that is very conservative. So that's a fun nickname. Let's leave it at that. But anyway, they picked up Lauri Markkanen and Colin Sexton, who are two young players, high draft pick players, right? That people think are good, that have scored lots of points and are on decent contracts. I should actually get Spotrac up in front of me to see what they're on. But I guess what I was going to say is they're terrible. And so here's the funny thing. Here's the argument I have for Cleveland. Cleveland is luckily in a situation with I want to say Evan Mobley. Is that the young player who should have been Rookie of the Year but got injured?
Yep.
Evan Mobley and Jarrett Jack, two young, productive, underpaid players. They are in great.
Jarrett Jack's about 40, so I think you meet someone else. He was still playing for G League Ignite recently, though.
How am I getting Jeff Jarrett? Okay, this is going to annoy the
Oh, we're
heck out of
talking
me.
about the center, Jarrett Allen.
Jarrett. Did
Yeah.
I say Jarrett Jack? Got Warriors on the
Jarrett.
mind.
We got
Okay.
Jeff Jarrett.
Jeff Jarrett. So they got Jeff Jarrett and Evan Mobley. Both Jeff Jarrett's on an underpaid contract. I think it's like $12 million a year. I'll look it up in just a sec. And Evan Mobley is like on a rookie deal.
Yep.
And he looked fantastic as a rookie. So the advantage you have at Cleveland is you have money to waste. And so Donovan Mitchell is an above average player. And I've been saying this for years about players like Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic. I think the impact of individual defense is overstated. I am not saying it's not important, but I am saying it gets very odd to see a player like Luka Doncic called a sieve on defense, and his team is 6th in the NBA in defensive rating. If he is that bad at defense, his team cannot be 6th in the NBA unless it is entirely possible to work around that. Now, if you have multiple horrible defenders on your squad, you're going to be in trouble, but it's a team sport. That's the entire point of how you construct a basketball team. It is not a problem if you have a James Harden who is not great at defense on your squad if he scores really well, as long as you have players like Jarrett Allen and Dwight Howard who can pick up the slack. So I'm not sold on Donovan Mitchell's defensive woes as much as others, but he's an above average player, which seems fine, and they have money to spend. So from that regards, it's good. Additionally, they got rid of 2 really bad players. Lauri Markkanen and Colin Sexton are terrible. So in grading this trade, I basically go Cleveland picked up an above average player, shed some bad players, and I don't think draft picks are really worth that much in the now if you're able to contend. And like with Jarrett Allen, you're able to contend now. They were a lottery team last year. They have improved with Donovan Mitchell, and they got rid of some bad players. So they've basically done addition by subtraction, got a good player, and then this is a weird one, Brian. Getting Donovan Mitchell, I think, helps. I've called this the Ray Allen principle before for another reason. So Ray Allen was brought to Boston in response to Kevin Garnett saying he didn't want to go to Boston. So Kevin Garnett was doing the exact same thing that Kevin Durant has done, which is going to improve the chance that I confuse their names. Kevin Garnett was like, I want off this stupid squad. Trade me. And Boston's like, we would love to have you on our squad. By the way, we were tanking. That was maybe too much of a whisper. They were clearly tanking the season before. They're like, we got Paul Pierce. Come on, join us. We're going to be great. And he said, I don't think you're good enough. And they went and picked up Ray Allen and said, what about now? And he said, absolutely, I'll join you now. So I've called it the Ray Allen principle, which is if you pick up a player that encourages another player to come along, it is 100% worth it. And so I could see Donovan Mitchell being a player just because of his cachet of helping Cleveland be a good destination. They're a great squad. So if they're a 50-win team next season with Donovan Mitchell being an all-star starter, I think that helps the squad. That's my 2 cents. So in all ways, I basically say Cleveland did what we just said. Like, you turn draft picks into above-average players. He's an above-average player. They got rid of 2 bad contracts, and they got a player that might attract other players. So I view this as a win for Cleveland and an absolute loss for Utah, because Utah took same point, a player with all-star cachet, and turned it into a bunch of beans, right? And 2 bad players. But I think where you're going to argue, so we're both going to agree Utah. We're going to say Utah lost this trade, right? We'll agree on that.
Yep.
The question you have, and I think this is where I'll agree with you, but just want to rephrase it. I think your point is you think Cleveland probably could have done more with those assets.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I like their rationale. We've got this great young core. Let's open it up, and we don't need future assets. Let's get a star now and go for a title. Great rationale. It's just, is Mitchell that guy? He might be. Maybe
he's
if
100% not. I'm happy to be wrong.
I'm more optimistic than you, I guess.
I'm happy for him to Russell Westbrook me and turn into a star. Russell Westbrook was in a similar boat, although Russell Westbrook was better than Donovan Mitchell at similar ages. But Russell Westbrook was an overpaid, overvalued player that I was like, he's overpaid and overvalued. And then he turned into a triple-double machine and got MVPs. I was like, he's an MVP, to the point where I was defending him as an MVP caliber player when other people were saying he was overrated, which was a weird hell. So Donovan Mitchell could do that. I wouldn't count on it, though.
Yeah, no, I think the odds of him getting there to make this trade worthwhile are not very high, under 50-50, right? And, yeah, what you said is true. Just kind of looking at, well, I'll talk about the Knicks in a second. All the different teams out there looking to make trades. It doesn't seem like the best they could have done. But I can't disagree with you. Are they in better shape now than before they made the deal? Yeah, I think so. I just wanted to see more.
But yeah, so from a weird almost chemistry perspective. So chemistry, there's a thing called a catalyst. And the key point about a catalyst is with any given chemical reaction, you basically combine some stuff, you get something else, but you lose something, right? You lose something due to energy or it turns into carbon dioxide or whatever. And catalysts are incredibly valuable because you are basically able to put some stuff together and lose nothing. And that's the ideal world. And so that's, I think, your complaint with this trade, and I think I'm prone to agree, which is you have these 2 big pile of assets. And essentially, if you look at what happened to both teams, they lost like 20 to 30% of that assets. I mean, well, Utah just lost all of it. Utah had a good asset and turned it into nothing.
Yeah, if Utah hadn't taken back Sexton and Markkanen, I would have liked it a lot more for them. But
if they would have just done draft picks, they would have been right.
Yeah.
And then, like, exactly what we're saying. It is you have to be so careful as a front office in picking up any asset that you are going to be forced to pay or play if you don't think it's going to be good. And draft picks are always those, and bad players are usually those.
So there's a theory about this that was posted to me on Twitter, and this is in relation to the Knicks, because it's being reported that basically the Knicks gave Utah a better offer than Cleveland did, and Utah said no to the Knicks. And so this person's theory is basically, this goes along with why they took Sexton back and Markkanen, is that this is just a straight up shameless tank job. They rather have Sexton than Mitchell Robinson because they want to guarantee the team is worse, and they can give Sexton a million shots and try to dump his contract at the trade deadline this year or next year. So if you really want to be a bad team, they're setting out and doing it.
And this is, that's another, like, 2 of my most unpopular opinions with it's funny, they're like tranches of analytics Twitter, and some is garbage, right? Some analytics Twitter, I'm like, that's nothing. You don't know what you're talking about. And there's a lot of really smart analytics Twitter that still holds true to like the belief that tanking is okay, which I've always been on. I think we've always been on like tanking is never the right maneuver. I'm still, against Sam Hinkie, even liking the guy. And like, that's the thing is like, I'm like, Hinkie did the job as well as you could do with the plan he had in mind. I just will never, ever, ever agree with his plan. So there is something like what you're saying, right? Tanking is stupid. Yeah. I am always, always of the opinion that if you have a chance to compete in an NBA season, you compete. And the rationale is actually very simple. I'm going to throw it back to, I think I said Klay Thompson. Players don't get paid for the offseason. The offseason is free money. You want to get to the offseason, and the offseason is so much nicer than the regular season. People miss this, which is all it takes is one tweaked thing to your opponent, and you can take a series you should not have. And I mean, for instance, the Warriors did this to the Nuggets back in the day, right? Right before light years. And the Warriors have had that happen to them, right? Cleveland and Toronto, arguably both, won a series against them. They shouldn't. Last year, I was really, really afraid with Gary Payton getting injured against Memphis, it was going to happen a third time. Like you were so lucky that Gary Payton came back. And I'm so happy it happened because as I kind of noted, when Gary Payton got injured against Memphis, I was like, I'm stuck because I'm no longer allowed to make any of the rooting paths I want. I can't root for Memphis in good faith because they injured it. And there's no scenario where the Golden State Warriors lose where I'm on their side because Gary Payton's not healthy. So it's like Gary Payton has to be healthy. And if Gary Payton's healthy and Steph Curry goes off, then I'm like, yes, I can root for the Warriors and be happy, which is what happened. So it's just like it takes small little things to win in the playoffs. And people underestimate, like, it's always funny that people say with certainty, oh, they're not going to compete in the playoffs, despite the fact that we've had multiple 8-1 upsets. Versus people act like it's a surefire thing if you tank to get a top 3 pick. And Sam Hinkie, I actually love him for this, showed it, right? It's like you have to tank for 4 seasons basically to get that pick you want. And he still lucked out, right? Ben Simmons was like once in a generation. And I would qualify that like once every 10, 15 years would be like once in a generation. That might or might not be the right way to say it. But, Ben Simmons was an amazing rookie. And it's like Joel Embiid is more the norm, right? Joel Embiid is a great player. I don't dispute that, but he's still beat up and injured. It's like a lot of times you luck into a star draft pick and they give you 1 or 2 good seasons and either demand a trade or get injured or whatever. So it's like the certainty people have that you are going to win in the draft, well, historically it says your odds of winning the draft are low, versus the certainty people have that you will not have an upset in the playoffs, where there have been tons of upset in the playoffs, is just baffling to me. So, that's what I'll say. Like if you're like Utah's tanking, it's like that is freaking stupid because it's like Utah got upset 3-1, right? Utah was a favorite against the Nuggets. The Nuggets came back in a 3-1 hole and upset them. One of the greatest series ever with the 2 players behind me. I miss him, man. Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Nikola Jokic is one of the all-time greats. What if? It's like you can upset in the playoffs if you make the playoffs. So you should always try and make the playoffs. Even if you win the draft lottery, there's no guarantee that number 1 pick's going to be productive.
Yeah, it's we'll see. I still love Cleveland. I think Mitchell. I wish he were a little bit bigger. I think he's too similar to Darius Garland. So I disagree on his defense a little bit, but their front court is so good. They're probably going to have Okoro as a starting small forward now. So I'm going to be rooting for Cleveland either way.
Yeah, I mean, I think here's an interesting thing that I hope, and this is my hope / theory on Donovan Mitchell. They have Kevin Love on an expiring deal for $28 million. I love Kevin Love, but if they are wise, they can flip that, right? Find somebody undervalued at the trade deadline, and you've got $28 million to trade for that player. So, not Rudy Gobert. I'm still. We didn't talk much about that on the show, which is a bummer. But I mean, just the 2 cents is like, God bless the Timberwolves. And the easy answer, by the way, is new ownership, right? Alex Rodriguez came in with new ownership, and for years and years and years, is it not? It's David Kahn is the GM. I'm trying to think who's the old owner of the Minnesota
Glenn Taylor.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Under the Glenn Taylor era, the team was really bad. They get new ownership, and suddenly this ownership turns it around, right? This new ownership comes in and actually is willing to go all in on Rudy Gobert, which is like fan-freaking-tastic. You look at the Houston Rockets, right? The Houston Rockets under, I don't remember the old owner, but the last owner, right? You're not allowed to lose. You're not allowed to tank. You get the Fertitta Tillman, right?
Yeah,
Whatever that's
Fertitta's
the
the
name of
new
it.
owner. I forget the old owner though.
Tillman Fertitta's like calling Chris Paul overrated and says they're not going to waste money, and the team falls apart.
That
So it's
didn't
just
work
like,
out very well.
yeah, really, you just look at ownership to see, yeah, like if
Yeah.
the team's got a shot, if they can spend money. So it's like, but there could be a player out there that's undervalued on some squad that they could flip Kevin Love into. And if that player wants to play with Donovan Mitchell, it could all be worth it. And that could even be like the difference. So it's like, I think Cleveland, I mean, they were what, a 44-win team last year. They've improved by like 5 or 6. They're a
Also,
50
they were
win
on a
team.
much higher pace before they had injuries, so they were on a pace to have.
Yeah, what they
much
lost
more wins.
Mobley and they lost Mobley in the playing game. They were the favorite in the playing game. They had injuries to their players. They had some injuries to Jarrett Allen. Obviously, Kevin Love is old. Ricky Rubio is old. So it's like, yeah,
Can I say
that
one
squad
thing,
looked.
Dre? The funniest thing about your comment about Tillman Fertitta saying, "Oh, we don't need Chris Paul anymore," they're saying it. The Phoenix Suns are saying that now. They're saying we don't need Chris Paul. I'm man. If he gets hurt, they're going to be terrible. Is what I'm saying.
Unless that's what's funny is like here's what bugged me like our draft discussion. It is entirely possible for teams to do wise things. I just don't see it. And so usually if you have an aging star, my 2 cents is kind of like dance with the one that brung you, right? Like Chris Paul's old and is probably over the hill, but you're probably not going to get commensurate back to Chris Paul. Now, if you do pull off what the Nets did back in the day, or the Celtics with the Nets did back in the day with like KG and Paul Pierce, go for it. But it's like if you've got a Chris Paul or a Kevin Durant, you kind of just have to stick with it and hope they do, and or like LeBron James with LA. You
I
kind of
mean,
just
look
got
how
to hope.
far this principle goes. A couple of years ago, everyone's saying, Tom Brady. He's 42, 43 years old. He looks completely done with the New England Patriots. We don't want him. Well, the Tampa Bay brought him in. They won a Super Bowl. And now he's 45 and he's still playing. Like, that's an extreme example, but yeah, don't sleep on the veterans.
All right. Well, any other thoughts on the Donovan Mitchell trade? I'm happy to be back. Happy to kind of just get back and fight in shape.
Yeah, I don't like
Get
it
the
for the Knicks
confusing
either.
Jarrett.
The Knicks tried to trade too much for Donovan Mitchell, and then they overpaid Barrett. Like the Knicks somehow ended up really bad in this trade.
I
Also,
was really happy with them overpaying for Barrett and going for Donovan Mitchell because the last article I wrote under numbers.substack.com was on Jalen Brunson, and I was like, good job. And I kept looking at the move, and the show, the last one of the last shows we did, we were talking about off-season moves, and we're like, good job by the Knicks, good job by the Knicks, and I was like, I can't deal with this. I can't deal with the Knicks being a well-run franchise. And I mean, and again, this is very Andrea Bargnani. Andrea Bargnani, for those that don't know, is the worst player of all time. It's Mount Rushmore, amazing. Like Andrea Bargnani and Cliff Robinson are like the two best players in the sense of being horrible and having really long careers, like playing ungodly bad for playoff teams for what could have in Cliff Robinson's case a title squad, a potential title squad. Horrible players, but occasionally Andrea Bargnani would go on a run. You'd have a week or two where he looked like a star, and it's like, oh my God, did he figure it out? And of course he didn't. Of course he didn't, Brian. And the same can happen with the Knicks, right? The Knicks can have like 2 decades in its ownership, right? As soon as James Dolan took over, the last season the Knicks made the NBA Finals was the season James Dolan acquired the squad, and they have been the worst team in the NBA since. That is saying something because the Clippers were still owned under Donald Sterling.
Marcus Cambier walking through that door.
Love it. Yeah, but anyway, so like just bad ownership. So is what it is.
Yep.
All right, Brian. I've got we've had a nice long show, gotten back into shape. I'll say I'm looking forward to talking more about this because it is really bizarre to see chess trending. And I'll just give a brief recap of where we're at the time of the show, let you make 1 or 2 comments, and then we'll do our shout outs and get out of here. There is a young American player named Hans Niemann who just crossed the 2,700. So 2,700 in chess is considered like the pinnacle to reach the next highest. Like if you were above 2,700, you're on the top strata of chess. If you're above 2,800, you're like an all-timer. If you're above 2,700, you're one of the top 20 in the world. Well, I think he's top 40, but close. He did so by beating Magnus Carlsen, who is the number one player in the world. The take your pick, just dropped his name, but like Djokovic or Federer, like this player that has been the number one forever and just absolutely
And this is a
amazing.
really big event too, right, Trey? The Sinquefield Cup is almost bigger than the World Championship in some ways, right? Big money event.
Sad. It's a sad day in that Rex Sinquefield in St. Louis is a huge chess proponent. Unfortunately, I think he's pretty conservative too,
Not a good
but a
guy.
huge chess proponent and puts on some of the biggest tournaments. So some of the biggest games play. And so to your point, Magnus Carlsen, the world number one, has withdrawn from the world championship. I think rightfully so, because I think the FIDE World Championship in chess is a really anachronistic, outdated, boring, slow, takes forever, is really stressful on the top players. And Magnus doesn't have any. The player Magnus Carlsen would have played had he played in the World Championship is Jan Nepomniachtchi, who is a top 10 player, but Magnus dismantled him 2 years ago. And so I think he is right to just go, I've got nothing to gain. I mean, I can, he can make some money. He can make 1 or 2 million, but he is such a good chess player that honestly, he can recoup that money other places if he wants to, even chess related. But the Sinquefield Cup, which the St. Louis Chess Club puts on some of these big tournaments. So they just put on the Rapid and Blitz tournament, and they're putting on the Sinquefield Cup, which is this huge tournament with $100,000 first prize to some of the top players in the world is going on right now. Hans Niemann is a wild card that got into that and beat Magnus Carlsen decisively and just huge and was the talk of the chess world. Then the next day, Magnus Carlsen withdrew. And the reason this is important is Magnus Carlsen's in his 30s, he was the second youngest world chess champion, which he got at age 22 or 23. He was probably able to get it 3 years earlier, but there was also complaints with FIDE at that time. So Magnus Carlsen has been great for like over a decade. He has never withdrawn from a tournament. Very speculative. Now, he did a very weird thing when he withdrew. He released like a meme of a soccer coach that's like, I'm not going to say nothing. If I say anything, I'll get in trouble. So he withdrew, was very cordial, and said, I'm not going to say anything, I'll get in trouble. Now, of course, what happens when you do that? Everybody speculates. Everybody is speculating that Magnus Carlsen believes Hans Niemann cheated. The reason this is a problem is Hans Niemann on chess.com was banned recently. He's only 19, so recently, he's a young guy. Was banned recently for cheating on chess.com. Additionally, after Magnus withdrew and said that complaint, chess.com revoked Hans's chess.com membership. And Hikaru Nakamura, who we talk a lot about here, is currently the number one in the world that crossed the 2,900 threshold, Brian, which is remarkable. I'm talking ELO ratings. That's how chess players are ranked. We've talked it a lot on the show. I'm not going to go too in depth because in theory, this is a quick recap. But so Hikaru Nakamura just crossed 2,900 in Blitz, the number one Blitz player in the world, the number one chess streamer in the world. Like he made a lot of money during the pandemic streaming, and that's his full-time gig. The reason Hikaru Nakamura isn't playing in the Sinquefield Cup is he says he makes more money streaming, so he's streaming instead. He has come out pretty heavily against Hans, implying that he's cheated, doing a lot of things, saying, I'm just like, Hikaru has said stuff like, I'm just throwing this out there. Hans was, banned for a period of time from chess.com. I'll let you say what you will. Other players know that. And some other players at the Sinquefield Cup are freezing out Hans as this is going on. So there's a lot interesting. One other theory I've heard, Brian, I think it's just a theory. That's the problem. I haven't had time to research this in depth. Someone was saying Magnus may believe that he has a leak in his camp. So top chess players have groups of players that help them study. They're called seconds. And Magnus is maybe under the impression that one of his seconds was leaking information to Hans's camp. And so if he believes that there is a breach in his own security, he might not want to play in this tournament until he finds out who that
Just
is.
real fast, I didn't know about that. And that's interesting because Magnus has a quote Hans has a quote that's something like, wow, I am the luckiest man in the world. I just happened to guess his opening and practice for it. He said something like that, right? So that could lead someone to be suspicious.
And some of the reason this is falling apart, it's funny, we always get back to this kind of stuff too, Brian, when we talk speed runs. And so, for video games, people like doing speed runs, which is trying to beat the game super fast. And the weird thing is this corner of the internet has lots of controversy of people faking speed runs because it's really easy to fake a speed run, right? I can have a computer play the game for me, record it, if I'm streaming on Twitch, I can play the recording and pretend I'm playing, and then and then people can take it apart and say, hey, there's something really screwy, like the thumb matchups don't match up with what's on the screen, or hey, I ran a random number generator and this sequence that he got is impossible, for instance. Now, so all kinds of stuff like that in terms of cheating, etc. And so when you take them apart, you do it in that way. There was one of the most famous is a Games Done Quick, Brian, where there's a cheater who he cheated on stream, agreed to do Games Done Quick, which is done live, and was like failing because the way Games Done Quick is like, oh, look it up. I forget the guy's name, but I believe it was like on Halo. But look up like Games Done Quick cheater, and it was just one of the most humiliating things because he clearly cheated. Then he agreed to play live. I don't know what they were thinking because then they're playing live and they're forgetting simple stuff, and people watching are like, what is he talking about? How could he be forgetting this? Like, for any normal speedrun, you would know to do this. And so Hikaru was watching some of Han's post-game interviews when he's talking his games and was noting that the stuff he was saying didn't make any sense. Now, there's a lot of easy defense. There's a lot of easy defense I'll throw out there, which is to say, when you're giving a post-game interview, you might be really frazzled. You might not be thinking straight. Nothing says just because a player gives a bad post-game interview in terms of analyzing their own game kind of ad hoc that they're, that proves that they're cheating or don't know what they're talking about. However, it's kind of suspect. And what I'll throw out is chess.com banning him. The other thing that's happened is Magnus had a group called Play Magnus, and that was part of the site chess24.com. Recently, chess.com and chess24 have basically announced they're merging in the near future. So Magnus has agreed he's going to chess.com. And he went on chess.com and got the highest blitz rating on chess, the highest online rating on chess.com. So Hikaru got the highest live rating. Magnus got the highest online rating. So that's a lot of fun. And I think it's a great thing because Magnus versus Hikaru, that's major money. That's a huge draw. So you definitely want that. So kudos to chess.com for doing that. So Magnus agreed to go to chess.com, and then chess.com banning Hans definitely gets into interesting spot. And Hans has kind of gone on the offense, saying like, they're besmirching my name and all this. But in the past, chess.com has come out and said, we have really good cheating detection, and we do not ban cheaters lightly, right? Like, we will, if we do this, we are confident in our decision. So the internet chess world is very fractured at the moment, with some people defending Hans, some people saying, of course he cheated. I don't know. We're going to have to wait. But what I will throw out there is like, chess.com is the biggest entity in chess right now. They have really good cheating detection. And they have said, like Danny Wrench, their CEO, who I am friends with on chess.com. Hey, Danny. He has come out before in like State of the Union kind of things and said, by the way, we are willing to go to court over any of our cheating claims. Like, that's how much confidence they have. So this could get very interesting. And what I'll throw out as just the last observation is, when a sport or activity exceeds the sport or activity, when the sideline stuff becomes important, that's when you've made it. So the fact that we are talking about off the court drama in chess, I think that's a good thing. Like, as weird as that sounds, we're coming from basketball where Tim Donaghy, a ref that refed, for instance, the Sacramento Kings game, one of the most notorious games that, people argue was fixed. Tim Donaghy was a ref that was known to fix NBA games that came out, and the world kept on going. So I don't think there's any cheating scandal that can hurt chess, but I think when the personalities playing chess are so big that it's news, it is so weird to see Magnus Carlsen and Hans Niemann trending on Twitter right now, when normally chess, even during like during the candidates, doesn't trend as well. So is what it is.
It's almost like the NBA and the ABA are merging, right? Hikaru and Magnus joining in one venture with Danny Wrench. We'll see.
Oh, okay, so let's throw this out there, Brian. Let's throw this out there. You got to decide. Actually, this is easy, but I'll throw it. Also, I'll capture you. I'll see if you got it right. Okay, so you could say Dr. J is the face of the ABA, Kareem's the face of the NBA when those two entities merged. Between Magnus and Hikaru, which of those is Dr. J, and which of those is Kareem?
Oh, that's funny.
It's easy, by the way.
Oh, is it? Tell me why, because it's not obvious to me.
Magnus is Kareem, Hikaru's Dr. J.
Really?
Because Magnus is the great. I think Magnus is the greatest of all time.
I'm just thinking personality-wise. Like, Magnus is kind of chill, but I guess he is like he's
Kareem's
a model or
Kareem's
something.
Chill.
Yeah.
I think
I always think of Kareem as being a very serious person.
He is. That is true. Nah, I stick with it. It's right. But anyway, more on that as that develops. That's just kind of a fun thing, and you know me, I always enjoy an excuse to talk chess. So I actually do have a shout out, but do you have any shout outs? We can end the show on that.
No, no shout outs. We'll see what happens with this chess situation. I'll just say that I've seen, in other games, young players come in and get accused of cheating, and sometimes they were cheaters and sometimes they weren't. So, yeah, I mean, we'll see if Hans is the real deal or not.
I would just give the advice of just be careful how deeply entrenched you get in this because it is sports, and so that's happening. I'm seeing lots of people very heartily start attacking Hans or very heartily start defending Hans. It's going to come out one way or the other in the future, and you could look very silly. So that would be my advice: is just be careful. Like, just wait. There's no need to get super invested. Although, like I said, it's pro wrestling. Like the off the court drama has now eclipsed the on field activity, and that could be good or bad. All right. Well, anyway, my shout out is to my wife and to Mick Foley. So my wife got me a Mick Foley cameo for my birthday, which was amazing. And without prompting, he talked about seeing Dr. J in the ABA. So for those that don't know, Mick Foley is one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Now he is one of the top-rated cameo stars of all time. Cameos where you can ask a celebrity of some sort, you have a personalized message, and Mick Foley is well known for giving really good messages. He has a 5-star rating on there. My wife got it for me, so made my birthday, and then like I said, extra bonus points. He talked basketball. He talked Dr. J. So there we go.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And it's not yet, but yeah, it's in the near future. That's the other part. My wife ordered it ahead of time because she wanted to be in time for my birthday, and he turned it around in a day. So it was super early. And she's like, you might see the credit card receipt, so I don't, you'll know what you're. She basically wanted to give it to me as a surprise. She's going, you'll know what you're getting if I have to wait 2 weeks to give it to you. So she gave it to me, which is a lot of fun. All right. Anyway, that has been our show. If you found us not through this website, you can find us at boxscoregeeks.com, and I might go back to writing at nerdnumbers.substack.com. We might be starting a Boxscore Geeks Substack. We'll see. With me, as always, producer, voice of God, man in many hats, Brian Foster, found most places as Boxscore Brian. I'm Nerd Numbers. Let's see, twitch.tv/Nerd Numbers is when we go live. We are aiming for every other Tuesday at about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, at least to get started. So somewhere around there. We'll try and keep it regular. And if we do it for like 2 weeks, Brian, then I'll start announcing it. And then people can ask questions in the chat like they used to back in the day. Find us on iTunes, Stitchers, all the places Boxscore Geeks shows are found. Yep, that's right. iTunes and Stitcher. You can find the Boxscore Geeks show on those. It's been a while, Brian. I'm out of practice. I'll have it for next time. We'll talk to you next time. See? There you go.